The night was utterly still, no wind, no sound, just a weight of expectation. 36 hours before the main strike, a small team from Ukraine's elite Siver's special unit deployed a mobile launch platform deep in the marshlands of southern Kherson region. The choice of location was no accident. The terrain, cut by channels blanketed in mist and shielded by dense vegetation, offered almost perfect natural concealment. And beyond it lay a direct route to the open waters of the Black Sea. On that platform, they mounted 6 drones, the AN-196 February B3 variant. These weren't standard models. They had been heavily upgraded for maximum strike power and high-level autonomy. Each carried a thermobaric warhead, capable of producing a massive overpressure explosion followed by a wave of searing heat that could ignite and annihilate everything in its blast radius. Before launch, every drone received a unique pre-programmed route, tailored to avoid known radar coverage, skirt probable electronic warfare zones, and exploit the contours of the terrain. Their navigation systems weren't just GPS-reliant. They used multispectral orientation, visual, inertial, and pseudo-satellite to stay on course even if jamming occurred. And then, one by one, the drones lifted off. They descended to ultra-low altitudes, between 25 and 50 meters, skimming under the radar horizon. Moving along the coastline, they slipped into the neutral waters of the Black Sea, cutting all external communications and entering full radio silence. From that moment, they flew autonomously, thinking, adapting, deciding without human input. Each drone was protected by the Mirage system, a multi-layered defense against electronic interference. It could switch between Galileo, GPS, and Beidou networks in real time, spoof enemy sensors with false positional data, and even project phantom ghost targets to confuse air defense radars. Their destination? Deep inside Russian territory, a highly guarded oil refinery complex near Sochi. By the time the strike group approached the Russian coastline, the mission had already shifted into its most dangerous phase, the penetration of one of the most heavily defended airspaces on the Black Sea. On the far side, across the border from Abkhazia, a second formation of drones was already in motion. These weren't carrying warheads. Their sole purpose was to act as decoys, to light up the radar screens and lure Russian air defenses into wasting precious time and ammunition. They were configured to simulate the radar profile, radio emissions, and flight behavior of heavy strike drones. Each one broadcast false electromagnetic signatures and even created shadow echoes that made them appear larger and closer than they were. For Russian operators manning the Pantsir and Tor M2 systems around Sochi, the readings were indistinguishable from genuine threats. The bait worked perfectly. Russian air defense crews reacted exactly as planned, locking onto Phantom Swarm and launching interceptors. Radar channels were flooded with noise, missile stocks were depleted, and targeting systems were occupied chasing ghosts. All the while, the real strike group was gliding in from the opposite direction, hugging the contours of the Caucasus foothills. This wasn't just blind luck. It was a calculated exploitation of the enemy's own defensive protocols. Air defense systems are designed to prioritize the most apparent and immediate threats. By overloading their decision-making processes with false positives, the Siver's unit created a temporary gap in radar coverage, a blind corridor that lasted only minutes but was all they needed. Flying in low and silent, the 6 AN-196 B3 strike drone slipped through that corridor undetected. At this altitude, they were below the radar horizon and shielded by the natural terrain, yet their navigation systems kept them locked precisely onto their programmed attack vectors. As they closed in on the target, Russian electronic warfare systems, specifically the Krasuka for a complex station near Twaps, began aggressive jamming attempts. High-powered radio frequency bursts tried to disrupt their navigation and force them off course. But the drones on board neural network navigation modules responded instantly. They switched to alternative guidance protocols, recalculated flight paths around interference zones, and continued toward the refinery with almost no delay. This is where the real advantage of the AN-196B3 became apparent. They were not simple remotely piloted craft, but semi-autonomous strike platforms with the ability to interpret a battlefield environment in real time. Even in complete signal loss, they could adapt, improvise, and complete their mission. By the time Russian radar operators realized the decoys were just that, decoys, it was too late. The strike group was already inside the defensive perimeter, moving in tight formation toward the heart of the target. At exactly 3:07 a.m., the lead drone, callsign Granite 4, initiated its final approach. At precisely 3:07 a.m., Granite 4 locked onto its target, a massive cylindrical fuel reservoir, designated RV-2000, used for storing aviation kerosene. The drone climbed to just 1.5 meters above ground level, closing the final meters at high speed. Its thermobaric warhead armed automatically as the onboard targeting system confirmed the structure's heat signature and contour match. The impact was instantaneous and catastrophic. The shaped charge tore through the steel plating, dispersing an aerosolized fuel cloud inside the tank. Milliseconds later, the explosive core ignited the vapor, producing a colossal overpressure blast. A rolling ball of flames surged upward, engulfing the structure, while shock waves rattled windows kilometers away. The night sky turned from black to orange-white in an instant. 16 seconds later, the second strike hit. Another drone dove onto the adjacent storage tank, duplicating the sequence. Again, steel ruptured, fuel ignited, and another towering column of fire joined the first. The two explosions fed each other's inferno, the heat so intense that nearby metal structures began to warp and sag within minutes. Meanwhile, Granite 6 targeted a different objective, the refinery's pipeline distribution hub. The warhead detonated directly on the main manifold, severing the feeder lines that connected the tanks to the refinery's processing units and loading stations. Pressurized fuel sprayed into the flames, turning the entire sector into a firestorm. All of this unfolded in less than a minute. Russian air defenses scrambled, but the refinery's own anti-drone systems were already blinded by the earlier decoy wave. Only one of the 6 strike drones was intercepted, and it was already seconds away from impact when it was hit, its wreckage falling harmlessly short of the target. Within minutes, the temperature at the epicenter reached 900 degrees Celsius, 1,650 degrees Fahrenheit. Secondary explosions began as smaller tanks and pipelines failed, adding more fuel to the blaze. The fireball's light was visible for tens of kilometers, and the smoke column rose so high that it was tracked by both civilian weather satellites and military reconnaissance assets. At Sochi International Airport, located just kilometers away, operations ground to a halt. Airport security initiated emergency evacuation procedures for passengers inside terminals. Flight boards lit up with delays and cancellations. Over the next 4 hours, at least 20 flights were either postponed or rerouted to Krasnodar and Mineral Vody. Air traffic control issued a red code, hazard warning for the airspace. Witnesses reported deafening concussion blasts and shock waves that could be felt across the city. Social media filled with shaky cell phone footage, some showing the initial drone impacts, others capturing the massive pillars of flame illuminating the coastline. Russian state media moved quickly to control the narrative, claiming a technical malfunction had caused a fire in a fuel tank. But the scale, precision, and timing of the explosions made that version implausible to anyone familiar with refinery operations. Independent analysts and Austin investigators, comparing satellite imagery from before and after the strike, confirmed that 2 major storage tanks, totaling around 4,000 square meters, were completely destroyed, along with a central pipeline distribution node. The loss of aviation fuel alone was estimated at over 3,000 tons, enough to supply large air bases for weeks. But as devastating as the physical destruction was, the psychological shock was perhaps greater. This was no random act of sabotage. It was a precision strike on a hardened strategic facility deep inside Russian territory, carried out with unmanned systems that slipped past every layer of defense. It was a message, delivered in fire and thunder, that nowhere was untouchable. By sunrise, the refinery's fuel farm was a scorched ruin. The fire crews that managed to get close enough to battle the blaze were met with intense heat, collapsing structures, and recurring explosions as residual fuel pockets ignited. It would take over 24 hours before the last flames were brought under control. The direct damage was staggering. 2 destroyed aviation fuel reservoirs, the refinery's main distribution hub annihilated, and the plant's cooling systems disabled beyond repair. The cost and infrastructure alone was estimated in the tens of millions of dollars. But this was only the surface of the impact. Intelligence sources reported that at least 3 major aviation fuel supply routes in Russia's southern military district were temporarily severed. Deliveries to airfields in Gelendzhik, Armavir, and Maykop were disrupted for between 2 and 4 days. This forced Russia to divert fuel shipments from as far as Volgograd and Rostov, stretching supply lines, delaying sorties, and increasing logistical costs. Civilian aviation felt the strain as well. With Sochi International partially shut down and local fuel stock depleted, airlines were forced to operate with reduced capacity, consolidate flights, and rely on costly refueling arrangements at alternate airports. For a city like Sochi, dependent on tourism, conferences, and events, the disruption was an economic blow far beyond the immediate damage to the refinery. Internationally, the strike sent ripples across the defense and intelligence communities. European Space Agency satellites and American commercial imaging platforms had tracked unusual thermal anomalies along the Black Sea coast hours before the attack, later identified as launch signatures from the Siver's drones. Analysts noted the remarkable level of coordination between satellite reconnaissance and the real-time execution of the operation, underscoring Ukraine's growing integration of space-based data into tactical planning. Attempts by Russian electronic warfare units to disrupt or hijack the drones had failed spectacularly. The Kherson complex near Tuapse logged the incoming signals but was unable to break their autonomy. This raised uncomfortable questions for Moscow. Either the attacking drones possessed technical capabilities that exceeded Russian expectations, or the defensive systems had been overestimated for years. The use of decoy drones was another tactical innovation that drew praise from military experts worldwide. By saturating enemy radars with false targets, the Siver's operators exploited a basic vulnerability in all integrated air defense systems: the need to prioritize targets in real time. The Panzer S crews around Sochi were locked onto ghosts while the real strike package slid through unnoticed. For the first time, a high-yield thermobaric attack had been conducted entirely by unmanned aerial platforms. No pilots, no risk of captured crews, no traditional airstrikes. And it was carried out hundreds of kilometers inside defended territory. The cost-benefit analysis was brutal. Each AN, 196 February, B-3 drone used in the attack cost an estimated $120,000. The total cost of the strike, under $1 million. The damage inflicted, easily 10 to 20 times greater, not counting the logistical disruption and psychological fallout. Strategically, the Sochi refinery strike was a proof of concept, a demonstration that critical infrastructure once considered safe was now within reach of precision drone warfare. Fuel depots, logistics hubs, and command centers, even deep in the rear, could be hit without warning. For Russia, it was more than a tactical loss. It was a public exposure of systemic vulnerabilities in air defense integration, in electronic warfare, and in the ability to protect strategic assets in depth. For Ukraine, it was a statement of capability, aimed not only at Moscow but at the world. The game board has changed. The Siver's unit has already been redeployed to an undisclosed location. According to defense sources, preparations for the next phase of their campaign are underway. If the Sochi strike was a warning, the next operation could be something even larger and just as precise. In the new model of warfare, the rules are clear. Distance is no longer protection. Scale does not guarantee survival. And the deadliest weapons are not always the largest or the loudest, but the smartest. The Sochi attack was not an isolated incident. It was a signal, and it was heard loud and clear.